morning. If you're joining us live on our website, I'm glad to have you out there. Good morning to you. If you're catching us on Big Country 99, this is a delayed program. You're catching a recording of it. Our show plays live from 8 a.m. in the morning, and so therefore, if you're listening to us on Big Country 99, the Rooster Radio Network, then you're listening to a recorded episode, and of course, our phone lines will ring to voicemail. You know, this issue of the Second Amendment Preservation Act is one which the state of Missouri has been fighting long and hard. And I got to tell you, I'm really incensed about what transpired last week, where, you know, there's actually two bills out there. And before we get too far into this, I want to just make it clear that there are 3 senators yesterday, or I should say on Monday, and these guys really stepped up to the plate, because there are 2 bills that are in part and parcel in this. One is and if you're not from Missouri, by the way, don't run and shut the radio off. What I'd like you to do is to recognize what they're doing here and try to replicate that in your state. The 10th Amendment Center has stated that what Missouri is doing with our Second Amendment Preservation Act and our Senate Resolution 36, which is a constitutional amendment, is the strongest interposition and nullification process and the strongest pro-gun legislation in the nation. So let me tell you something, folks. If this is, you know, if you live in a state where you are not active in that capacity, then I encourage you to speak to your state legislators and get this kind of stuff on the ballot in your cities and states and your locales. Get this stuff on the books as legislation working its way through your assembly or state Congress, or whatever you call it in your given state. These 3 state senators stepped up to work and preserve the rights of Missourians. I sent an email to them yesterday, and the reason I did is because I want to make sure that as often as I throw politicians under the bus, when they do the right thing, I want to make sure that we let them know that that we're proud of them for that we praise them when they do the right thing. You know, I know this may sound insulting to those politicians out there who are listening to this, but we treat you like puppies, right? When you do the wrong thing, we smack you on the nose with a newspaper, or we rub your nose in it. When you do the right thing, we praise you and say, good boy. So the truth is, it's time for us from time to time to pick up the telephone or send an email to these people and let them know that we appreciate the effort that they've accomplished. And in this case, because these guys are actually fighting an interposition/nullification fight, I'm very much in their corner. These guys moved forward the Senate resolution, which is a constitutional amendment to make the right of Missourians and their rights to own and bear and possess firearms unalienable and inviolate. Now, we already have that in our Second Amendment, but we already know that the federal government treats the Second Amendment as if it's some kind of a foot map, right? I mean, these people wipe their feet on it. You know, it's amazing to me how abusive and violative they are of all of these things that we consider to be the basic Bill of Rights. They follow none of them. And a large part of that is because we no longer live in a constitutional republic. But the simple truth is, these people have stepped up to say, we're going to utilize the principle of nullification, and we're going to utilize it in a way that enables us to interpose ourselves and stand between what government is doing and present ourselves as a blockage, if you will, again, between the bully and the people, the bully being the federal government. You know, there are a lot of states, and in fact, I posted an article up there about the secession movement in New York. They want to split upstate New York from New York City and Albany, right? And with good reason. I mean, here you've got this terrorist, Cuomo, and he's a terrorist, ladies and gentlemen. He's a terrorist and a micro-tyrant is what he is. I mean, here you've got a guy who says there's no place for conservatives in the state of New York. Well, then, frankly, all the people in New York ought to just say, that's good, we secede. The secession movement is not limited to New York. It's happening in Maryland, it's happening in Colorado, California, here in southern Missouri. The idea of seceding away from a state that is abusive of the rights of the citizenry and abusive of their resources in terms of their taxes and so forth, we're seeing more and more and more of it every day. And in this case, states are seeking to secede from their capital cities because their governments are unresponsive to them. Well, you know, Missouri, we have the same problems. I mean, our state governments are not responsive to us on a lot of ways, but in other ways they are, and we're going to, you know, I'll explain to you in a moment how they are working on the Second Amendment thing. But the next actions that we're going to see from states who want to secede are going to be that they want to secede from their capitals, or these entire states are going to want to start seceding. And I got to tell you, nullification was the answer that was given to us by both Jefferson and Madison as an interim step before we destroy the Union and the Republic itself. See, the 10th Amendment states that or gives us the guidance that the states are the masters, if you will, and that we as a nation created the federal government for the benefit of the states. Yet that's gone topsy-turvy. So the right of those states to nullify federal laws which are abusive of their citizenry is the step that comes in between in the interim that says, listen, we're not necessarily going to secede away from the nation, but what we are going to do is we're going to stand here as the protector of our people against federal overreach. When we see an oppressive national government, but you know, it's funny, these people who decry the principles and the concepts of nullification, it's funny how they use it to legalize marijuana in Colorado and in Washington State, as two perfect examples would show. And they utilize it to legalize same-sex marriage in places where well, of course, the DOMA was across the board in the United States, right? The Defense of Marriage Act. But all these states that have legalized gay marriage are essentially nullifying that federal law. So why is it that they say we can't use nullification for things like our gun rights and our privacy rights and our rights to free speech, but they can use it when they want to for things like marijuana legislation, legalization, the institution of and in fact our governor is doing it right here, the institution of gay marriage tax credits when our state has a legal prohibition against doing that. So what we have is these three senators. Their names are Richard, I shouldn't say his last name is not Richards, it's Richard, Dempsey, and Schaaf. And these three guys essentially moved forward these two bills. One is SJR 36, and it's a constitutional amendment that will be on the ballot in the fall in 2014. The idea of that is to make our Second Amendment rights unalienable and inviolate, and not only against federal overreach, but even state overreach, which, let's be candid, just because, you know, state people get out of control too, including our own governor as an example. But in addition to that, they also perfected Senate Bill 613. Now that is the new replacement for last year's Second Amendment Preservation Act, which was passed by both the House and the Senate, and then the governor vetoed. They didn't have enough votes to override the veto, and so essentially we went back to square one. There were some changes made to the bill to clarify some language that was the apparent reason for their refusal to override the governor's veto, and now it's back out again. Now, the other day there was an email that went out from the NRA ILA. Now, the ILA is the legislative arm of the NRA. And there was an amendment that was inserted into Senate Bill 613, the Second Amendment Preservation Act, by a liberal who injected this amendment into it and tried to bollocks up the works. Well, the NRA went out and confused the Missouri legislation with other legislation in other states. And they sent out an alert that said, essentially, your NRA ILA opposes this anti-gun legislation. We seek to create a de facto. It seeks to create a de facto gun owner registry, as well as place unknown civil liabilities on the gun owners. Action on this legislation is expected immediately in the Missouri Senate. Please call your state senator now and urge them to vote no. Wow. So wait a second. We've got the NRA working, and what bothers me about this is not the fact that they were actually trying to generate phone calls to the state Senate. What bothers me is they were wrong. What they were claiming was that this amendment created a gun registry and that there were civil liabilities tied to it. They were saying that there was a $1,000 fine if you didn't report a gun stolen within 72 hours, and that you would be you could be found guilty of a Class A misdemeanor, and you could lose your right to carry if you didn't report a gun stolen. Well, guess what, folks? The amendment didn't say that. Even though it was a very, very liberal, injected by a very liberal guy, there were no penalties listed like that. And the NRA came out and shoved their big foot in our mouth. And after years and years and years of fighting to get this kind of legislation through in our state assembly, they had the unmitigated gall to make a mistake, and they still have not retracted it. I spoke to an NRA ILA representative yesterday. I said to him, how dare you make a mistake like that? Come into our state. First of all, you have an obligation before you go out there and target millions of NRA members with an alert that is demanding that they call their state senator and vote no on a bill, which we've all been fighting for years, and you're not even right. You're not even accurate. And the guy kept making excuses, saying, well, you know, there's other bills in other states that are similar. I said, listen, you weren't sending that alert out for other states and similar legislation. You sent this out for this one, and you guys made a mistake, and you haven't retracted it yet, and they haven't. I got to tell you, I'd like to hear our listeners call the NRA, ILA, and say to them, we're from Missouri, we're mad as heck, and we demand that you retract that statement and send out an email and an alert stating publicly that you made a mistake. I invited to have this guy come on the air. Of course, he says, well, I can't do that. I don't have the authority for that. I said, well, then you can contact your Missouri representatives, and I'll have them on the air. Well, if they're interested, they'll call you. Really? My phone hasn't rung, by the way. Now, I called their toll-free number, which I'm going to give you now. It's 800-392-8683. And what I asked him when I first called up is, how could you have gotten this so wrong? How could you have made a mistake of this magnitude and then thrown a rock into the glass, the fragile glass of the Second Amendment Preservation Act that we've all worked for years so hard to get approved? His explanation to me was, well, there's similar bills in other states. I said, stop right there. I don't even want to hear that noise. The guy actually was taking it personally, and a number of times I said to him, listen, this isn't between me and you. I'm pointing out that you're the representative for the ILA I'm speaking to on the phone. Therefore, you represent the NRA ILA right now. And you're telling me that this is outside of your personal purview. It's not about you. If you don't have the authority, pass me on to someone who does. See, the problem here is that the NRA jumped the gun. They went off half-cocked. And yes, I'm using all these silly gun euphemisms for a reason. The truth is that they dropped the ball, that they shot their mouth off before they went and checked their facts. And they have created a problem. Now, I got to tell you, yesterday, or on Monday, these state senators that I was referencing before, Richard, Dempsey, and Schaaf, these people actually went to the point where they actually had that amendment stripped out of the bill. And they used a legislative parliamentary tactic, if you will, to get it out of there. And so now that whole issue, which, you know, they first put in there, or that the NRA, ILA was screaming bloody murder about, is not even in there. But more importantly, you know, I don't know. It just seems to me like the NRA jumps in, and their primary call is that, well, it's all about sporting. I'm telling you right now, this is not about sporting. You don't have gun rights for sporting purposes to hunt deer or shoot ducks. You've got arms and the right to bear and keep and possess arms in the defense of your nation, not to shoot ducks and deer. I'm tired of hearing that out of the NRA. I know they try to say that so that they try to capture the fringe element who says, well, I don't own a gun and I don't know anything about them, but I suppose, you know, people should have them so that they can hunt. Listen, what is up with the whole principle of everybody constantly wanting to water down the edges so that there's no firm corners? The truth is, you know, we hear that in the Republican Party. Well, we've got to make sure we capture the Hispanic vote. Let me tell you something. I don't care how many lines in the sand you blur. The Hispanics are never going to vote for you. They're never going to vote for a conservative principle because they expect and want exactly what tyrants like Obama will give them. Free crap at the expense of the taxpayers, at the largesse of the Treasury. And they got that from the place they came from, and they have no intention of giving it up when they come here. So stop trying to pander to a whole group that is limited in whether or not they can even want to follow you. Well, we have to capture that Hispanic vote. Let me tell you something. They stand against you in every respect. And they're never going to agree that the conservative principles of freedom and self-governance and self-reliance are the primary functional motivators. Because they came from a place where they never had self-governance. They never had freedom. They never had liberty. I mean, it's really insulting, almost. Because we're all told, those of us who are the true believers, and who do believe in self-governance and self-motivation and self-reliance, we're all told, well, we have to ameliorate your position, and we have to keep watering it down so that we can grab these people who might follow us on the fringes. So meanwhile, ultimately, what happens? We stand for nothing. The truth is, everybody's lost their perspective. I've said this before, and I've said it on the air. The whole thing feels like gravity has left the Earth, and everything is in flux. Nothing is as it should feel or seem. You know, it's like we're floating in air, and there's nothing we can get a hold of and grab a hold of to arrest our movement, or at least give us something to push against so we can get our feet back solidly on the ground. It's that way for a reason, ladies and gentlemen. It's that way for a reason. You know, there are state legislators here in Missouri who have done the right thing. And I wanted to take a minute to thank them, and I sent them an email. And I just said to them, I wanted to take a moment to thank each of you for your efforts on behalf of the citizens and your constituents in Missouri on the 2 Senate actions today. I also indicated in there that, furthermore, I'm gratified the following language has been struck, something about convicted felons being barred from having firearms ownership, because I feel strongly that if you are not guilty of a violent crime, I mean, if you haven't, you know, I mean, I get it. If you stuck a gun in Mrs. McGillicuddy's nose and said, give me your purse, we got a whole different circumstance. But there's a lot of people running around in the state of Missouri that, you know, have a felony from when they were 20 and 19 and 18 and even younger. And here they are 20, 30, 40 years down the road, and they're prohibited from owning a firearm. But worse yet, their families are prohibited. That's even more risky, because now you're saying that not only can you not defend your own home and your property, but no one in your family can own a firearm because they live in the same house with you. That's a problem, and it's a national problem, by the way. But anyway, I essentially went out there and said that I agree that, and I commend you for your stance on SB 613, the Second Amendment Preservation Act. Senator Schaff, in particular, has done the state a service in removing the Nasheed Amendment, and the state of Missouri will be a far better place, having effectively nullified federal overreach on the rights of every man. On my radio program, I often point out the failures of politicians. However, in contrast, I also strongly encourage my audience to applaud the efforts of those who stand firm for the principles upon which our nation has been founded. You gentlemen today have earned that praise, and they have. I got to tell you, part of the problem that we have as conservatives, and when I say conservatives, I don't mean in some political sense, I mean patriots. Part of the problem that we have is that maybe we don't give accolades to our legislators often enough when they do the right thing. Because that is what breeds that fear in them that, well, we got to go get the Hispanic vote. Maybe that's a mistake on our part, that we're not offering them enough assurance that we're happy with when they do the right thing. If that constant seeking of the fringe element, if you will, or those who don't even have similarly aligned concepts and principles and beliefs, if that's motivated by the fact that they're not getting enough feedback from us, maybe we need to step up our level of feedback. So here's my challenge to you. Are you communicating with your legislators on a routine basis, not just to bellyache and whine, not just to throw them under the bus, but are you on there and going to them and saying from time to time, hey, you did the right thing here, and I appreciate that, and I just want to thank you. Don't take this as some blanket endorsement of you. I'm not telling you that, because I'll throw you under the bus when you do the wrong thing. But I do want to thank you when you do the right thing, and today you did the right thing. Maybe we need to be better communicators with them. I don't want it to be sycophantic. I think politicians, they see people walk up and, oh, thank you for all that you do, blah, 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 blah. Be specific. Say, look, you did the right thing on SB 613 or SJR 36, and I applaud that. I'm watching you, but I appreciate your effort. Maybe we need to be a little bit more proactive about that. So I encourage you to think about ways in which you can be more proactive with your legislator. And if you're a Missouri resident, by the way, and you're not going to MissouriFirst.org, MoFirst.org, MoFirst.org. That's the site that's been set up, and Ron Calzone is responsible for that. I've talked to you before about this. This is the best way for you to communicate with your legislators, because he created that witness form so you can actually get your statements on the record. You can't beat that, ladies and gentlemen, because it doesn't make it anecdotal. It makes it empirical evidence. That's important. Use it. I applaud Ron for all that he's done with that site. It's just outstanding. If you're not familiar with it, and if you're not from Missouri, make sure that you go and look at it and figure out how you can create that same system for your state. Promise you'll benefit from it. Our state has. Okay. Enough on the politicians. We're going to take a quick break. The question I have in this next segment is, why is Europe buying the debt that China and Japan are dumping? And yesterday there was a note out about Japan and how they have sold the second largest amount ever of U.S. Treasuries in December, and how Europe, through Belgium, has come to the rescue, so to speak, to buy that debt up in its place. And Zero Hedge has a great article out about it, but we're going to talk about some other stuff as well that related to that. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to America's Voice Now. Make sure that you visit our sponsors over at the law offices of Jason Henry, 417-256-4100. Our friends over at Patriot Cigar and Tobacco at 257-1776. Wits End at 417-372-2027. It's Wits End Classic Barbershop. Our friends at Battery Station, batterystation.com, or 417-257-7799. And Pizza Hut on Porter Wagoner Boulevard, where you can get yourself a great lunch. And then as well, make sure that you visit the two locations for Express Mini Marts 1 and 2. They can be found on 14 and 63 in West Plains at Old Granny's Cafe. And then you can also find the other location straight across the street from the City Pool on Porter Wagoner Boulevard. Make sure that you use their drive-thru if you don't want to get out of the car when the weather is bad. We'll be happy to have you. They offer the lowest guaranteed prices on tobacco products, and in their northern location on 14 and 63, also on liquor and wine and beer and things like that. They have this monster ice-cold beer cave up there. Okay. Find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org. Communicate with me by sending email to mike@americasvoicenow.org. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to look a little bit at this debt dump that's going on, and what does that bode for us as a nation? Because, listen, folks, if they're not buying our debt, you got to wonder who is. Why is Europe buying our debt when they got so much of their own? We're going to look at it.